Should citizens of Hawaii have a right to defend themselves, their families, and their property? I'm Aaliyah Zimmerman, and this is News Behind the News. Welcome to this hot topic, what's sure to be a hot topic today on our show. And I want to welcome Bill Richter, and he's from the Hawaii Rifle Association. And I wanted you to introduce yourself and then talk about your group a little bit.
All right. Well, again, Bill Richter. I'm the secretary for the Hawaii Rifle Association. We're the oldest firearms advocacy group in Hawaii. And besides advocating for Second Amendment rights for Hawaii citizens, we're also involved in firearms safety training and legislation, lobbying, and trying to reform some of the Hawaii restrictive firearms laws.
Okay, and then what about you today, Chris?
I am Chris Baker. I'm from the newest firearm advocacy group, the Hawaii Defense Foundation. Very similar to the HRA's goals. We focus more on civil litigation and other means of self-defense other than firearms.
Okay, now, Bill, you've been at the legislature quite a bit. Maybe you can give an overview of Hawaii's laws.
In general, Hawaii probably has some of the most restrictive firearms laws in the nation. Essentially, open or concealed carry of a firearm for regular citizens is almost non-existent. It's at the discretion of the respective county police chiefs, and they tend not to offer that option to us.
That's because we have a may issue. They may issue it rather than they have to issue it through a shall issue law, right?
Correct.
Okay.
One of the things Hawaii Rifle Association has always pushed is every year there's a measure introduced in the legislative session to bring concealed carry to Hawaii, and generally it's defeated early on. The legislature just doesn't seem to be very interested in promoting those types of civil rights for our citizens.
So to give a big picture, what other states, we have, the majority of states have the right to concealed carry, isn't that right? What's the number now?
Approximately 40 states have a shall issue concealed carry law on the books, meaning that as long as you're not a prohibited person and you meet whatever objective standards that state defines, then there is no ability to get denied a permit by a bureaucratic individual who just simply doesn't share your opinion about the need for concealed carry.
So generally speaking, there has been some progress. Like last year at the legislature, tell me about the progress that was made.
Well, I think two of the biggest milestones we were able to reach was the prohibition against seizure of firearms, legally owned firearms, during a declared disaster emergency. Many people remember what happened in Katrina, where there wasn't the police force to protect them, yet the police force spent a lot of time, effort, and energy in forcibly disarming citizens who were then left defenseless at the hands of criminals who, of course, didn't comply with the law, and, of course, who the police couldn't otherwise constrain. The other real major victory in Hawaii last year was the ability to sort of expand on what's commonly called the castle doctrine. The castle doctrine being a theory of law that says that you can treat your home like a castle. You're able to defend those within. In Hawaii, up until the passage of this most recent law, you could be held civilly liable if you hurt or injured somebody who broke into your home, even though that use of force was completely justifiable, whatever that force may have been. So we're real happy that we're able to now shield Hawaii homeowners and residents from that civil liability that would come on the heels of such an incident.
So Christopher, to throw you on the hot seat, what did you think of that law that before Hawaii, when Hawaii didn't have the castle, it's not exactly the castle doctrine, but close as we can hope to get in Hawaii.
Exactly.
What did you feel about that law, where you weren't even allowed to protect yourself if somebody broke in, potentially?
It's always a difficult situation when the legislators tell you that you have to retreat from your home, or that a criminal can break in and cut himself and then sue you when it was his fault that he was there to begin with. So it's a big ease to homeowners to know that they can, people should still call the police and alert security, but not knowing that you may not have $1 million lawsuit coming for defending your child in their bedroom or your wife or family in your house is a big ease to people. And it was great that the HRA was able to work on that and get that through. And I think there's only a few states left that don't have provisions for that. And then, as he said, the confiscation bill. Growing up on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, Katrina was a big issue, and Hurricane Katrina came through, and the National Guard and police forces went through and seizing people's firearms in the time of need. So knowing that won't happen here if we were to have a tsunami or an earthquake or some sort of hurricane come through is a big ease to owners.
So people who are opposed to, or don't even, or maybe aren't even educated about the issue, they might say, why should you be able to carry a firearm? Or why should you when, you know, there's shootings happening, and so, you know, the recent Arizona shooting, somebody just came up and shot the car, and so why do you think you should be allowed to carry a firearm? Maybe we should take away all the firearms.
Prohibitions on firearms have not worked well for many cities who have attempted to do that. Washington, D.C., and the city of Chicago being the most recent who had their handgun laws struck down. Those two cities had some of the highest handgun crime in the entire nation. They also had some of the highest murder rates in the nation.
So they had bans on firearms, but they had the highest, you're saying one of the highest rates of, say it again, just so people can make sure.
They had some of the highest crime per capita, so when we rank people per 100,000, Chicago and Washington, D.C., both were very close to the top. Their prohibitions were on the handguns. Handguns are the prime choice for people, the prime firearm for people's choice of self-defense items in the home.
Well, on this very show, we have had on Alan Gottlieb, who was from the Second Amendment Foundation and was one of the group that challenged that law, and so that was a huge Supreme Court case, and then it was struck down first in D.C., right? D.C. versus Heller, and Heller versus D.C., I think.
Heller versus the District of Columbia came through in 2008, and McDonald versus the City of Chicago came through in 2010. One was the challenge of basically whether or not the Second Amendment meant we had a right to bear arms. The next was whether or not the 14th Amendment protected states from infringing on the Second Amendment through the Due Process Clause. Both cases were in the favor of the Second Amendment Foundation and Alan Gura, and it was a huge success for firearm owners.
So what about this year at the legislature? You're looking to strengthen the Second Amendment rights, but there's other people, particularly some legislators, who want to take them away. So maybe you can talk about some of the legislation that's out there now, or whoever wants to.
Well, there are two bills out there now, and I have my card in front of me, so I may get the numbers wrong, but I believe they're 441 and 386. Both are House bills. One of them, 441, is sort of an omnibus bill, if you will. It contains multiple provisions, of which is a requirement for a lock and all of the requisite documentation for that. There is a requirement for ammunition that it only be sold to folks that can demonstrate a registration for that particular firearm that uses that ammunition. There's a requirement, there's a proposed ban on .50 caliber ammunition and firearms. I know I'm forgetting a couple.
Well, the .50 caliber comes out every year.
It seems to. It's
Yeah.
been out since 2008, 2009, and 2010. All had bills related to banning .50 calibers.
Usually that was the police chief, Boise Correa, and he, you know, I've been to many press conferences where he actually gets the whole the whole .50 caliber out and puts it all together and to show what a big scary firearm it is, and says it can shoot, I think he says something like it can shoot 8 miles from, Honolulu to Hawaii or something like that. But, so what, in your opinion, why shouldn't that be banned?
Well, it's interesting, and I hate to jump in, but, when they talk about this 8-mile range of a .50 caliber, the longest shot now made with any rifle, I believe, is just about 1.5 miles, and it was made by an expert marksman shooting a much smaller caliber. So the attempt to try and portray this as some super bullet that has unmatched destructive ability at ranges far beyond its true capabilities is nothing more than scare tactics. The reality is that there's never been a crime that we know of that's been committed with a .50 caliber.
In Hawaii, Anywhere.
In Hawaii, and as far as I know, anywhere in the nation. Now, I'm not quite as sure as the nation one. I believe there's been a few seized from criminal activity, but there's no evidence that it was actually used in any criminal activity. And so again, it's just a big scare tactic. You know, when you bring out a weapon that is 14 pounds, it's 3.5 foot long, it costs $10,000. That's not what your average criminal out on the street is going to be trying to get a hold of.
It's a little hard to carry that around under your jacket.
Well, it's an obvious attempt to kind of legislate a problem that doesn't exist.
Okay, what are your thoughts on that?
So in 1990, Barrett, they're one of the prime makers of the 50 caliber firearms. They were summoned to give testimony, and at that point, only 16 crimes in the United States had ever been committed with relating to the 50 caliber, and that it doesn't mean shooting. That means a felon might have been found in possession of it or illegally transporting. It could have been any crime. They raid a house and one's there. But as Bill said, these firearms are extremely expensive. They are used for sport shooters, some hunters. It's not what our average criminal is looking for. Most of us who have jobs can't afford a $10,000 firearm. In fact, the average person that owned a Barrett 50 caliber was making over $50,000 a year. So it's very unlikely that anything like that happens with a criminal getting hold of one. You could say one of the reasons they say is because terrorists could get it. Well, terrorists are usually funded by backdoors of millions of dollars, but terrorists in 90% of their cases prefer explosives. They're more effective, they're cheaper, they cause a bigger commotion. It meets the goal for terrorists in causing fear in people. So the likelihood that somebody's going to use a 50 caliber to shoot down a jet or something along those lines, as they say, it's so unlikely. It's just going to prevent legal owners from possessing their firearms, which is not what we should be doing.
And I think if I remember right, there was only about 30 people in Hawaii that had those. It was a very low number from what I remember.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but you're
Yeah.
right. I think we can safely assume that it's not the most popular firearm in the islands.
So besides that legislation, what was the other?
Well, the other bill relates specifically to the ammunition issue and requiring a registered firearm of that caliber before you could purchase that ammunition.
And how are you supposed to prove that you have
You're
that?
supposed to carry around, and that's one of the problems with the bill as written, is it doesn't specify whether or not it needs to be the original document or it can be a copy of it. But essentially you have to prove the registration, that you have a registration for that particular firearm. In our particular case, besides representing Hawaii Rifle Association, I'm the president of Lessons in Firearms Education. We put on monthly classes, and one of the things that I have to do routinely for my classes is buy ammunition. Well, I don't own all of the guns that are required to do the class. Many of the other instructors bring their personal firearms, but I would then be prohibited from buying ammunition for the class because I don't have a registration for every firearm that's there. So if the intent of this bill is to make us safer, well, then I would simply say that the reality is that without the ability to purchase that ammunition, we can't safely train new shooters in Hawaii, and therefore we're actually creating a more unsafe environment.
Okay, Chris, what about you?
So along those lines, making rules that prohibit firearm owners from purchasing ammunition, in a sense, it's kind of silly. People can reload ammunition. Ammunition can be shipped into the island. It's not prohibited. You pay a hazmat fee. It just costs a little more because it's heavy. But not allowing us to buy ammunition for firearms we don't own, as Bill said. Many of us go to shoot a friend's rifle at the range, and on our way down there, we like to go to the store and pick up ammunition and do our part for our buddies. The other problem with it is the disclosure of the registration. So in the HRS 134 code, firearm registration data is prohibited from being disclosed to anybody except law enforcement. So to take our registrations down there, which many times show multiple firearms on a slip, and hand that to a dealer is basically giving away our information, which is the one thing the legislature wanted to protect when they enacted that portion of the bill. So they are kind of prohibited by their own laws from even pushing that through.
So do you remember who introduced those bills?
I believe Blake Oshiro introduced the 441 and
The firearms registration?
that's the omnibus one with everything.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, Rhodes introduced 386.
Representative Rhodes, okay. So what do you think in terms of the counter, the other side? You want to introduce legislation or have introduced legislation that you support. So what do you support? What do you want to see in Hawaii?
Well, we would like to see current laws enforced in general. We don't like, both sides of the anti-gun or pro-gun. We generally have the same goal. We don't want criminals to have firearms. We just have different ways of getting to that goal. If we were to propose legislation, we would like to see a shall issue concealed carry policy. In general, across the United States, that is the standard. In Florida, the requirements are that you take a class that relates to carrying firearms, you're taught the laws, you meet all the requirements, and you're not prohibited from carrying your firearm. We would like to see that come around here. It is tragic situations when people are being hurt all the time, with the exception of some of the HPD officers who have in the recent news been able to defend themselves because they legally carry firearms.
So people would say, like, for example, our mayor is extremely anti-Second Amendment. He would say that we should you shouldn't be allowed to have guns because you can't, or concealed carry because, it's going to, Hawaii's already safe enough. We're already have one of the lowest crime rates, and so why do we need more guns on the street? Why risk it?
So speaking of crime rates, we're not exactly sure what statistics they've been citing because they don't post that information for us. So we'll go off of 2009 FBI crime reports. In 2009, Hawaii ranked 17th in the nation when you take the United States and its territories and rank that per 100,000 capita. So 17th in the nation is not a great statistic. I don't know if we're handing out trophies for being 17th, but I'm usually, number one's the best place to be. We are not at number one. We do very poor in many aspects of violent crime, especially in larceny, property crime, motor vehicle theft. One thing we do very well in, on the other hand, is murder. We are 7th in the nation for murder. However, Vermont, who has constitutional carry, is number one. So for them to say that their firearms restrictions is what got them there, that wouldn't be the case, because anybody over the age of 18 or 21 for the case of a handgun can carry one in Vermont.
Okay, so that's what constitutional carry is, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
Constitutional carry is generally, for Arizona, Arizona still has a permit process, which allows people to carry in the more exclusive zones, so school zones or up to secure areas in courthouses, usually inside the restaurant where they serve alcohol. But in general, if you're over the age of 21, you're not prohibited from owning a firearm. You're allowed to carry that firearm for self-defense purposes without a permit.
So, we hear all the time that there was a school shooting, firearms should be banned on, say, a college campus. And what's your thought on that?
Well, I think it's perpetuating a myth that somehow disarming the good guys, the folks that would possibly be able to respond in that very brief instance to minimize the damage that would be done by an active shooter in a school, is just a wrong-headed approach. People like to say that, if, Choi? No, Virginia Tech. Choi? Okay, couldn't remember his name. If Choi didn't have his guns, then, we wouldn't have had that shooting. Well, on the other hand, if somebody, a law-abiding concealed carry citizen, was there, it's quite possible that he could have ended that situation relatively quickly and relatively safely. A couple of issues come up, and I've heard this from our local politicians, that they're afraid that maybe the citizens will shoot the wrong person. But if you look at the police shooting statistics, you'll find that that they only hit about 30 to 40% of the time for the number of rounds expended. And that for the best information we can find, we actually find that concealed carry permittees have a less incident of hitting an innocent bystander than police. And part of that is the nature of the job. I don't want to say that the police aren't effective at what they do, but I think it does demonstrate that these fears that somehow the law-abiding citizen is not going to be able to hit what he's aiming at or won't be able to perform under the pressure of the situation just isn't borne out by the facts.
So, some people might say, well, hitting any pedestrian or any innocent citizen is wrong. So what would you say to that?
Well, if that's the case, then the police certainly have shot innocent people in multiple instances. Mm-hmm. So I would say, why is it that there seems to be a double standard? Mm-hmm. I mean, what most people don't understand when we talk about concealed carry is that they don't understand that the police don't have an obligation to protect you. There is no expectation when you call 911 where you can say the police are going to come. Now, they will, and they will do their best, but logic dictates that they can't be everywhere at the same time, and that if they got a call from someplace that they won't be able to get there in time. Most crimes happen in a time frame far smaller or shorter than a response time for a police officer to get to you. So why deny somebody the ability to use the very same tools that the police officer routinely has in order to protect themselves, especially in light of the fact that the police aren't really obligated to do so in the first place?
Well, one big issue we have in Hawaii, in fact, we just had legislation introduced through the Law Enforcement Coalition yesterday, was about domestic violence and how Hawaii has a big domestic violence problem. And so they're talking about what can they do. And, a lot of times they talk about now this law that they're proposing, if you file a TRO and then somebody commits, crime, that person commits a crime against you, they're going to elevate it from murder 1, they can elevate it and add some more time on. Murder 2, they can do that. And, so different things like that. Because what they were saying was people don't feel protected by a TRO, which is a temporary restraining order. So what about that?
When you file a TRO, it's basically a piece of paper to somebody to not come near you. That piece of paper is not going to stop them if they choose to do so. Mm-hmm. Generally, just saying that, well, he was here, I saw him, he's around me, it may not be enough for the police department to act on that because, you might just file it and then say, oh, I saw him yesterday, just to get the person thrown in jail. So they have... you have to have some proof that they were there. But in many cases here, people have filed TROs, been killed by the person they filed a TRO. And that's one of the things that Hawaii Defense Foundation is going to be working on, is teaching people personal security. What to do if you had thought somebody was following you. Maybe it's the person filed a TRO against. What other means, not even counting firearms, do you have to protect yourself, be it pepper spray, hopefully in the future electric devices like a stun gun or taser, so a little bit less than lethal generally forms of protection. But it's just something we have to work on in general, maybe through our teachings and practices and just how we deal with people in general day to day, all around. If we're all treat each other nicer, we can develop a better society.
Well, I also think that it's real imperative that people look at that piece of proposed legislation and realize that the operative determination in that legislation is that somebody dies. We would much rather promote laws and abilities of people to protect themselves and to avoid having to prosecute a criminal for murder. And that's what we're looking at, is we don't want to, after the fact, say, oh, it was doubly bad or doubly illegal for you to use a firearm versus a baseball bat or the butt of a shotgun in Tupuola's case, rather than actually firing the gun off and causing somebody to die. We want people to be able to protect themselves. And we think that there are reasonable means to do that, including non-firearms related manners, and of course the ability to carry a concealed firearm. I think it's ridiculous that the police around in Hawaii almost always, when given the option, carry concealed off duty. because they feel like there's enough threats out there to endanger them, but somehow discount our same concerns. And we live in the very same place and encounter the very same people that we did. In March 2009, when the police officer was attacked at the 7-Eleven store in Waianae, it was an unknown person to him. So it could have easily been you or I or Chris sitting there. The only difference, of course, is that that police officer was able to defend themselves with a concealed handgun that he was allowed to carry and that we're prohibited from doing so.
So you teach lessons in firearms education through life, right?
Correct.
And so do you have women in your class?
We do. As a matter of fact, we have seen an increase in women in general. One of our instructors is a female and takes great interest in promoting it in the perspective of the woman being able to defend herself. One of the ways that she got interested in it was she felt that if something happened and her significant other had tried to defend them with a gun, if something happened to him or the gun got loose, that she should be able to utilize that firearm in an effective manner, and realized that she didn't. And so she took the course and ultimately became an instructor and is now a very big advocate for women's use of firearms in self-defense.
So to be able to purchase a firearm in Hawaii, what do you have to do? You have to take a class?
You have to take a class that is provided by an NRA instructor that has 4 hours of classroom time. That classroom time has to include Hawaii firearms laws, and you have to have at least 2 hours of range time, so active firing of that firearm.
Mm-hmm. And then you can go to take that permit or that affidavit to the store.
And it's a fairly convoluted and drawn out process.
Right.
So you get the affidavit, you go to the firearms store, you pick out the firearm you want, you write a check or pay cash. The firearms store gives you the information. You go down to HPD, you show them your affidavit, fill out a ton of paperwork. They tell you to come back in 14 to 20 days. You do so. You pick up the permit 14 to 20 days later at HPD. You then take that back to the gun store and you pick up your gun. And then you take that gun and the paperwork and you return to HPD for yet a third time and complete the registration process.
So if somebody's threatening to kill you, you better tell them to wait at least 2 weeks.
Pre-plan.
Before they
we
can
would
come
suggest
for
you
you.
Pre-plan and
Right.
take our courses now, or anybody's courses for that matter.
Right,
but
right.
you know, secure your means of self-defense early on.
Right. Okay. What about you? What in terms of what's coming up for you, Chris? In terms of maybe some action that your group will take. Can you share any news?
We caution legislators in their decisions to violate the Second Amendment. Court cases are dropping all around the nation, and the path that they're going will lead them to litigation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what about any thoughts this year with the legislation of what you'd like to see for the outcome?
Well, there's a couple of things. Concealed carry, of course, is high on our priority list. We'd like to see some reforms in terms of liability, especially for those that teach firearms classes, and a number of other things that would just allow a better means for the regular citizens to lawfully own firearms, decreasing some of the restrictive nature, some of the complicated processes associated with them.
Great. I can't believe we're already out of time. Been News Behind the News, and stay tuned to see what happens this legislative session. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks to Chris and Bill. Aloha.